London, 1599. The city smells like mud, smoke, and river water. The streets are loud, crowded, chaotic, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a group of merchants is sitting around a table with a very simple problem. They want to get rich. Not comfortable, not successful, rich. The kind of rich that changes your family forever. The kind of rich that makes kings nervous. And they figured out exactly how to do it. Spices. That's it. That's the whole plan. Black pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg. Things that today you can buy for $2 at any grocery store. Back then, these were worth more than gold. A single ship loaded with nutmeg could return 60,000% profit. That's not a typo. 60,000%. One voyage could set a man up for 10 generations. The problem was getting there. The Spice Islands, what we now call Indonesia, were on the other side of the world. The journey took years. Ships sank, crews died of disease, pirates attacked, and even if you made it there and back, the Portuguese and the Dutch had already carved up most of the trade routes between them, and they were not interested in sharing. So these London merchants did something that had never really been done before. They pooled their money together, spread the risk. If one ship sank, no single person was ruined. Everyone owned a piece of every voyage. It was, essentially, the world's first joint stock company. They called it the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. We know it as the East India Company. On the 31st of December, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I signed their royal charter and gave them something extraordinary, a complete legal monopoly on all English trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. No other English merchant could compete. The entire eastern trade was theirs. They started with £72,000 raised from 218 investors. What they built with it is almost impossible to comprehend. But here's the thing, for the first 100 years, the East India Company was just a trading business. Successful, yes. Profitable, definitely. But just a company. They set up trading posts, they negotiated with local rulers, they bought spices, silk, cotton, and tea and shipped it back to England. They weren't conquerors, not yet. What changed everything was one word, one concept that completely rewired what the company believed it could do: private armies. See, the trading posts kept getting attacked. Rival European powers, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, all wanted the same routes and the same profits. So the company started hiring soldiers. Just for protection, they said. Just to guard the warehouses. But once you have an army, the calculation changes entirely. Why negotiate with a local ruler when you could just pressure them? Why pay fair prices when you have guns? Why share the profits when you have the military power to take everything? This is the moment the East India Company stopped being a business and started becoming something else entirely. And the man who pushed them across that line had one of the most remarkable and disturbing rises to power in history. His name was Robert Clive, and in 1743 he arrived in India as a clerk. He was 18 years old, miserable, deeply in debt, and by multiple accounts, absolutely terrible at the job. He attempted suicide twice in his first years in India. The pistol misfired both times. He apparently took it as a sign that he was meant for something bigger. He was right, just not in the way you'd hope. And in 1751, he got his chance. A local conflict broke out, the kind of messy, complicated power struggle that was constantly happening across India at this point. The French were backing one side, the English were backing another, and the English candidate was losing badly. Clive volunteered to lead a force to capture the city of Arcot. His superiors thought he was insane. He had 200 soldiers. The enemy had thousands. He took Arcot anyway. Then he held it for 53 days against a siege, outnumbered, outgunned, and he won. Overnight, Clive became a legend. In England, they called him a hero. In India, local rulers started paying attention. This company had soldiers who fought like they had nothing to lose. The EIC gave Clive more resources, more soldiers, more authority. And then came 1757, the moment that changed everything. The Nawab of Bengal was a young man named Siraj-ud-Dowlah. 20-something years old, newly in power, and already deeply suspicious of the East India Company's growing presence in his territory. He wasn't wrong to be suspicious. The company had been quietly fortifying their trading post in Calcutta, building up walls, stockpiling weapons, without his permission. This was his territory, his kingdom, and a foreign trading company was essentially building a fortress inside it. Siraj-ud-Dowlah marched on Calcutta with 50,000 soldiers and took it in a single day. The British were humiliated, expelled, and the story that came out of it, the Black Hole of Calcutta, where British prisoners were allegedly locked in a tiny cell and many died overnight, sent shockwaves back to London. Whether the full story was accurate or exaggerated doesn't matter for what happened next. What matters is that Clive was sent back with a fleet and an army. His official mission was to retake Calcutta. His actual plan was far bigger. Clive made a secret deal with one of Siraj-ud-Dowlah's own generals, a man named Mir Jafar. The arrangement was simple and brutal. Mir Jafar would betray the Nawab during the battle. In return, Clive would make him the new Nawab of Bengal. On the 23rd of June, 1757, both armies met on a flat, rain-soaked plain called Plassey. The numbers were absurd. Siraj-ud-Dowlah had roughly 50,000 troops. Clive had around 3,000. But Mir Jafar never attacked. His 35,000 soldiers stood at the edge of the battlefield and watched, and Siraj-ud-Dowlah, confused and betrayed by his own general, was routed in a matter of hours. The Battle of Plassey lasted one afternoon, and it handed the East India Company the richest province in India. Bengal at the time wasn't just wealthy, it was producing somewhere between 12 and 15% of global GDP on its own. It had sophisticated textile industries, massive agricultural output, established trade networks across Asia and the Middle East. The company had just stumbled into controlling all of it. Now here's where it gets dark, really dark. Once the EIC controlled Bengal, they didn't govern it, not really. They extracted it. They inherited the right to collect taxes from the entire province, tens of millions of people. And rather than invest any of it back into Bengal's economy, they used the tax revenue to buy Bengal's own goods and ship them back to England for profit. Read that again. They taxed the people of Bengal, then used that tax money to purchase the products those same people made, then sold those products in England and kept the profit. The people of Bengal were essentially funding their own exploitation. Company officials grew obscenely rich. Clive himself returned to England with a personal fortune estimated at £300,000, roughly $40 million in today's money, and that's a conservative estimate. He bought a seat in Parliament. He bought multiple country estates. He bought essentially a place in the British ruling class. Back in Bengal, the results were catastrophic. In 1770, a famine struck. The monsoon failed, crops died, and the East India Company, which now controlled the food supply and the tax system, did almost nothing. Between 1769 and 1773, somewhere between 1 and 10 million people died, a third of Bengal's entire population. Gone. And the company kept collecting taxes throughout the famine. When the population shrank, they simply raised the rates on whoever survived to maintain revenue. This wasn't incompetence. This was a corporation optimizing for profit with no accountability to the people it ruled. By the mid-1700s, the East India Company wasn't just a company. It had its own army. At its peak, 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the British Army itself. Think about that. A private corporation had a bigger military than the country that created it. It had its own navy, its own courts, its own prisons, its own diplomatic corps. It negotiated treaties with foreign powers. It declared wars. It minted coins. It ruled, at various points, over 200 million people. That's more than the entire population of Europe at the time. And all of this was technically done in the name of trade. The most extraordinary part is how it was structured. The company's shareholders, sitting in London coffee houses checking their dividends, were effectively the absentee rulers of the Indian subcontinent. They never visited, never governed, never saw the consequences. They just collected the returns. But here's what the history books often skip. The East India Company didn't fall because the British government grew a conscience. It fell because it became too expensive to maintain. The company's military adventures kept escalating. Every new territory required more soldiers, more wars, more administration. Profits that should have flowed back to shareholders kept getting swallowed by military costs. By the 1770s, the company was so deep in financial trouble that it had to ask the British government for a bailout. Sound familiar? The British government gave them the money, but with conditions, oversight, regulations. Slowly, steadily, the government started taking control of what the company could and couldn't do. And then in 1857, everything collapsed. Indian soldiers serving in the company's own army, called sepoys, revolted. It started over a rumor about rifle cartridges being greased with animal fat, offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. But that was just the match. The powder had been building for a century of exploitation, humiliation, and broken promises. The rebellion spread across northern India. It was brutal on both sides. Massacres, reprisals, cities burned. When it was finally crushed, the British government made a decision. The East India Company was dissolved. On the 1st of November 1858, the British Crown took direct control of India. The company's territories, its army, its debts, all transferred to the government. The world's most powerful corporation ceased to exist. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. The East India Company didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built by a system that rewarded extraction over fairness, profit over accountability, and distance over consequence. Its shareholders never had to look the people they ruled in the eye. And the structures it pioneered, the joint stock model, the outsourcing of violence, the corporate capture of political power, the idea that a private entity could govern millions of people, those didn't disappear when the company did. They evolved. Today, the world's largest corporations have revenues bigger than most nations. They lobby governments. They shape regulation. They operate across borders in ways that make accountability almost impossible. No single country fully controls them. No single legal system fully reaches them. The East India Company lasted 258 years. It didn't end because someone stopped it. It ended because it ran out of money. And the next time you hear about a corporation that's become too big to fail, too powerful to regulate, too profitable to question, remember that we've been here before.